The crystal chandelier cast shadows across the mahogany dining table at Château Marmont's private dining room. Dad's 60th birthday celebration was in full swing, with 30 family members gathered around the enormous table laden with prime rib and vintage wine. I sat at the far end, quietly picking at my salad while conversations swirled around me about stock portfolios, real estate acquisitions and business mergers. "Isabella, you've been awfully quiet tonight," my stepmother Victoria announced, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she gestured with her wine glass. "Still working on those hobby paintings?" My brother Marcus, sitting to Dad's right in his custom Armani suit, let out a sharp laugh. "Still painting those little pictures?" he mocked, cutting into his steak with theatrical precision. "What a waste of a business degree. Harvard MBA and she's playing with finger paints." I took a sip of water and smiled. "I enjoy it. Enjoy it." My sister Catherine chimed in from across the table, her voice dripping with condescension. "Isabella, you're 32 years old. When are you going to get a real job? Something that actually pays the bills?" Dad cleared his throat, his weathered hands folded over his considerable belly. "Your sister has a point, Isabella. This art phase has gone on long enough. I could get you a position at Martinez Holdings. Start you in accounting, work your way up properly. Like the rest of us did," Marcus added, straightening his tie. "Some of us actually contribute to the family business instead of wasting time with crayons." I nodded thoughtfully, spooning another bite of salad. Around the table, cousins and uncles murmured agreement. Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her Botoxed forehead barely creasing with concern. "Sweetheart, we're just worried about your future," she said in that syrupy tone reserved for addressing children. "Living in that tiny studio apartment, driving that old Honda. It's not sustainable." "The Honda runs fine," I replied calmly. Marcus snorted. "Isabella, I spent more on my watch than you probably make in 6 months. Look around this table. Everyone here is successful. Everyone except—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Victoria refilled her wine glass, the Bordeaux sloshing against crystal. "It's embarrassing, really. When people ask what Richard's daughters do, I have to explain that one runs the European division and the other paints." "Doodles," Marcus corrected with a smirk. "Let's call it what it is." Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. "Isabella, you know I love you. But this family has a reputation to maintain. Martinez Holdings is a billion-dollar company. When you're introduced as my daughter, people expect more." I set down my fork and looked around the table. 30 pairs of eyes stared back at me, some pitying, others annoyed, all convinced they understood my life better than I did. "I understand your concerns," I said quietly. "Good," Catherine said, relief flooding her voice. "So you'll consider Dad's offer? The accounting position starts at $200,000. That's more than you've probably seen in your entire artistic career." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. The caller ID made my heart skip. Alexander Whitmore, director of Whitmore Galleries. "Excuse me," I said, reaching for the phone. "I should take this." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Probably someone wanting to buy a finger painting for $50. I swiped to answer. "Hello, Alexander." "Isabella." Alexander's refined British accent carried clearly through the speaker. The dining room was quiet enough that his voice echoed slightly off the walls. "Darling, I have the most extraordinary news. Are you sitting down?" I glanced around the table. Every conversation had stopped. 30 faces watched me with varying degrees of curiosity and amusement. "I'm at dinner actually," I said. "What's going on?" "The auction just concluded at Christie's," Alexander continued, his voice building with excitement. "Your piece, Fractured Light, Isabella, it sold for $847 million. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt the blood drain from my face, not from shock, but from the sudden realization that my carefully guarded secret was about to explode across this table like a grenade. $847 million? I repeated slowly. Marcus's fork clattered to his plate. Catherine's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Yes." "The bidding war was absolutely fierce," Alexander gushed, oblivious to the fact that he was currently destroying every assumption my family had held about my life. "Rothschild went head-to-head with the Getty Foundation. It's the highest price ever paid for a work by a living female artist. Isabella Reyes is officially the most valuable contemporary artist in the world. The silence around the table was deafening. Dad's mouth hung open. Victoria's complexion had gone ashen beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Alexander," I said carefully, "you're on speaker." "Oh. Wonderful. Then everyone can hear the marvelous news. This brings your total sales this year to over $3 billion. The retrospective at MoMA is completely sold out, and the Louvre is still begging for first rights to your next series." Marcus made a strangled sound. Catherine set her wine glass down so hard that red liquid sloshed onto the white tablecloth. $3 billion. Aunt Patricia whispered. "This year alone," Alexander confirmed cheerfully. "Though of course that doesn't include the private collection sales or the licensing deals. Isabella, darling, Forbes wants to do another cover story. Something about being the youngest artist to break the billion-dollar barrier." I closed my eyes briefly. "Alexander, can we discuss this tomorrow?" "Of course. I'm just so excited. The Times wants a statement and CNN is requesting an interview. Oh, and your agent called. Netflix approved the documentary budget. $50 million for the Isabella Reyes story, From Shadows to Stardom." The phone felt heavy in my hand. Around the table my family sat frozen like figures in a wax museum. "I'll call you in the morning," I said. "Brilliant. Congratulations again, darling. $847 million. Your father must be so proud." The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked around the table. The silence stretched on until I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents above. Dad spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "Isabella Reyes?" I nodded. "But your name is Isabella Martinez," Catherine said, confusion evident in her voice. "I use my mother's maiden name professionally," I explained. "For privacy." Marcus leaned forward, his face pale. You're Isabella Reyes? The Isabella Reyes. I paint under that name, yes." Victoria's hand trembled as she reached for her wine. "The Isabella Reyes who had that exhibition at the Guggenheim? The one all over the news." "That's me. But that woman is." Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. "That woman is worth." He stopped, staring at his phone. Then he slowly turned the screen toward the table. It showed a Forbes article titled, "Art World's Newest Billionaire. How Isabella Reyes Built a $4.2 billion Empire." $4.2 billion, he read aloud, his voice cracking slightly. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched my family process the information, their faces cycling through disbelief, shock, and something that looked remarkably like fear. "This is impossible," Catherine said, shaking her head. "We would have known. We would have seen the money." I smiled sadly. "Would you have? When's the last time any of you visited my tiny studio apartment?" "It is tiny," Victoria insisted. "I drove by it once." "You drove by the building I rent for my public address," I corrected. "For mail and interviews. I don't actually live there." Dad found his voice. "Where do you live?" "I have several homes," I said quietly. "The main one is in the hills. 12,000 square feet, 8 bedrooms, infinity pool overlooking the city. I bought it from a tech mogul for $43 million last year." Marcus made that strangled sound again. "The Honda," he managed. "I like the Honda. It's reliable." I paused. "Though I also have the Lamborghini, the Bentley, and the vintage Ferrari collection. They're in the garage at the Malibu house." Aunt Patricia's face had gone completely white. "The Malibu house? Oceanfront, 6 bedrooms. I use it for the monthly artists' retreats I fund. $22 million, but the location was worth every penny." The conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 years was finally happening, and it felt surreal. These people who had spent decades convinced I was a failure were now learning that I'd quietly built an empire while they weren't paying attention. "But how?" Dad asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "How did we not know?" "Because you never asked," I said simply. "You saw the paint on my hands and assumed I was struggling. You saw the old car and the modest apartment address and filled in the rest." Catherine leaned forward, her legal mind starting to process. "The interviews, the articles, Isabella Reyes is always described as reclusive, private. No family photos, no personal information. I prefer to keep my personal life separate from my career." "But the money," Marcus said, still staring at his phone. Where's all the money? I considered how much to reveal. Some is invested. Real estate, stocks, bonds. Some goes to charity. I fund 12 art programs in underserved communities. And some... I paused, wondering if I should continue. Some what? Victoria pressed. Some has been quietly supporting this family for the past 5 years. The silence returned, heavier this time. What do you mean? Dad asked slowly. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. When Catherine's firm was struggling during the lawsuit 3 years ago, who do you think provided the anonymous loan that kept you afloat? Catherine's eyes widened. That was a private investor. We never found out who. When Marcus's tech startup needed emergency funding, where do you think that mysterious venture capital came from? Marcus's face went completely pale. The Phoenix Fund. They said they preferred to remain anonymous investors. Phoenix Fund is one of my investment vehicles, I confirmed. When Dad needed bridge financing for the Amsterdam office expansion, when Victoria's mother needed that experimental cancer treatment that insurance wouldn't cover, when Aunt Patricia's daughter needed help with Stanford tuition. I trailed off, watching comprehension dawn on their faces. All of you, Dad whispered. Over the past 5 years, this family has received approximately $47 million in what you believed were anonymous gifts, loans, and investments. All from me. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. 47 million, she repeated. Give or take a few $100,000 for smaller gifts. Christmas bonuses for the staff, college funds for the grandchildren, that sort of thing. Marcus was scrolling through his phone frantically. Phoenix Fund. Phoenix Fund. Oh God. He looked up, his face ashen. Phoenix Fund owns 18% of Martinez Holdings. Dad's eyes snapped to mine. What? When the company faced that hostile takeover attempt 2 years ago, someone quietly bought up shares to prevent it. The family retained control because Phoenix Fund supported you. That was you. Dad's voice was barely audible. The family business means everything to you. I wasn't going to let some corporate raiders destroy what you built. The weight of revelation seemed to press down on the entire table. I watched my family, people who had spent years treating me like a charity case, slowly realize that I had been the one keeping them afloat. But why? Catherine asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Why help us when we've been so dismissive? So condescending? I finished gently. Because you're my family. Because despite everything, I love you. Dad buried his face in his hands. Isabella, how can you ever forgive us? There's nothing to forgive, I said, though the years of hurt ran deeper than I cared to admit. You made assumptions based on what you could see. I chose not to correct them. But why? Victoria asked, her usual composure completely shattered. Why hide all this? I looked around the table at these people I'd known my entire life. People who had reduced me to a failed artist living in poverty because it fit their narrative better than the truth. Because I wanted to see who you really were, I said quietly. I wanted to know if you could love me when you thought I had nothing to offer. The words hit the table like physical blows. I watched my family grapple with the implications, that they had failed a test they didn't know they were taking. And? Marcus asked, his voice small. I considered lying, offering false comfort. But this moment demanded honesty. Tonight, Marcus, you called my life's work a waste. Catherine, you called my career embarrassing. Victoria, you said I was a disappointment to the family name. I paused, letting the words sink in. You loved me when you thought I was successful, and you tolerated me when you thought I was poor. But you never just loved me. Tears were flowing freely now. Catherine reached across the table toward me, but I didn't take her hand. Isabella, Dad said, his voice breaking. Please. Tell us how to fix this. I stood up slowly, my napkin falling to the floor. I don't know if you can. Don't say that, Victoria pleaded. Please. We'll do anything. Will you? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. Because for 5 years, you had the chance to do something very simple. You could have asked about my life instead of assuming you knew it. You could have visited my studio instead of driving by the building. You could have looked at my work instead of dismissing it as finger painting. I picked up my purse. A simple black leather bag that had cost more than Marcus's watch but looked like something from a department store. "Where are you going?" Dad asked desperately. "Home," I said. "To think." "Which home?" Catherine asked quietly. "The one where I keep my little pictures," I replied. "The one's worth $4 billion. As I walked toward the door, I heard Dad call out behind me. "Isabella. The company, Phoenix Fund. What happens now?" I paused without turning around. "The shares are yours. They always were. I never wanted control of Martinez Holdings." "Then what do you want?" he asked. I turned back to face the table full of people who had just learned that everything they thought they knew about me was wrong. "I want a family that sees me for who I am, not what they think I should be," I said. "I want people who ask about my day instead of assuming it was unproductive. I want relatives who celebrate my successes instead of being embarrassed by my career." The silence stretched between us. "I want what I've been giving all of you for 5 years," I continued. "Love without conditions. Support without judgment. Belief without proof." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen, Alexander's contact information still displayed from our call. "This man has been more of a family to me than any of you," I said quietly. "He knows my work, celebrates my victories, and supports my vision. He's never once suggested I get a real job, or called my paintings finger paintings." Victoria sobbed openly now. "Please don't leave like this." "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm going home to decide whether I want to keep pretending we're the family I wished we were, or if I want to finally accept the family we actually are." I walked out of the private dining room and through the hotel lobby, past startled valets and confused guests. My phone buzzed with texts, probably from family members desperately trying to process what had just happened. Outside, I looked at my Honda Civic parked between a Porsche and a Mercedes. I'd bought it because I genuinely liked it, but I'd kept it partly as a test. Every family gathering, someone commented on my old car without ever asking why I chose it. As I drove through the hills toward home, I thought about the evening's revelations. The secret I'd guarded for years was out. My family knew the truth about Isabella Reyes, about the money, about the support I'd been providing. But they still didn't know the most important truth of all, that their love, when it came with conditions and expectations, wasn't really love at all. The gates to my estate opened automatically as I approached. The house rose before me, a modernist masterpiece of glass and steel with lights twinkling in every window. My studio occupied the entire east wing, 3,000 square feet of north-facing windows and custom lighting where I created the little pictures that had somehow become worth more than most people's entire lives. Inside, I poured a glass of wine and stood before my latest work, a piece I'd been calling Family Portrait. It showed figures around a dinner table, their faces obscured by shadows, reaching toward something in the center that remained deliberately unclear. My phone buzzed with another text from Catherine. "Please come back. We need to talk." But for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel the need to manage my family's emotions or fix their problems. They had 47 million reasons to figure out their own feelings about who I really was. I picked up my brush and added a single stroke of gold to the painting's center. A small light that might have been hope or might have been goodbye. Outside my windows, the city sprawled below like a canvas of lights, and I realized that for the first time in years, I felt completely free to paint my own future. Tomorrow I would decide whether that future included the people who had spent 32 years seeing only what they expected to see, or if it was time to find a family who could love the real Isabella, not the one they'd imagined, and not the one they'd just discovered but the one I'd always been. The choice finally was entirely mine.